And since they are so successful, we can find these prokaryotes essentially everywhere. They also form our microbiota. So biota refers to living, micro is small. So these are the community of microorganisms that live in and on our bodies. As we mentioned at the very beginning of the chapter, the prokaryotic cells in and on your body outnumber your normal body cells approximately 10 to 1. So there's so many of them there that they must do something, and they help us with, where's my cursor? Here we go. They help us with supplying essential vitamins, and they do that by helping to break down nutrients in our digestive tract, primarily in your large intestines. Also in our digestive tract, they help extract nutrients from food molecules that we cannot normally digest. So the microbiota in our digestive tract help us have a nice, efficient digestive system. Without those microbes in our guts, small and large intestines, we actually would probably be malnourished. And they guard against disease-causing intruders. So most of the bacteria that are in our mouths, nasal passages, and intestinal tract, our gut, establish themselves. They essentially live in association with us, and they help prevent the establishment of disease-causing bacteria, what are called pathogens. Pathogens are disease-causing organisms. So the prokaryotes also decompose dead organisms and waste material. So this is environmental benefits, helping to return chemical elements through chemical cycling back into the environment, especially things like nitrogen. So they're very, very important in just naturally occurring ecological processes, especially helping to decompose things that die. So let's look a little bit at the structure and function of our prokaryotes. They do lack a nucleus, which is why they're classified as prokaryotic organisms. And they do lack other organelles. They have mitochondria and they have ribosomes. They typically have cell walls external to the plasma membrane. And they do have a remarkable range of diversity, even though they are single-celled organisms. They do have various shapes, but 3 shapes are very common to the cells, or the 3 most common shapes are round, spherical bacteria that are also called cocci. There are rod-shaped bacteria, which are also called bacilli. And then there are variations of the spiral-shaped bacteria. So these are the common shapes of the bacteria. Now, if you see here on the spherical or cocci bacteria, it is common for them to live in aggregations, but they are single-celled organisms. Oh, here's one undergoing cell division, binary fission, just about ready to split into 2. Here's one that looks like just beginning to divide. Okay, so about half of all the prokaryotes are mobile, using flagella to move around. So flagella are extensions of the plasma membrane, just the way these little pili are. And then there's components of the cytoskeleton that are within the flagella, and then that helps the flagella move and beat and help move the bacteria. Many of these prokaryotes attach to surfaces and form what are called biofilms, which are very common in nature and in organisms too. So for example, you have a biofilm of prokaryotic organisms on your teeth. Okay, so a biofilm will be comprised of 1 or several species of prokaryotes and may include protists and even fungi. So this is a microscope picture of a biofilm, and you can see that there are rod-shaped bacteria. It looks like there's some round, spherical cocci bacteria of different species here. So biofilms can form on most surfaces, including in nature, rocks, metal surfaces, plastic, and organic material, and including, again, our teeth. That's the plaque, for example, that the dentist scrapes off on occasion. So here's a short little video showing flagellated salmonella, which is a type of bacillus, rod-shaped bacteria, and you can see really well how the flagella beats and helps these things move around in an aqueous, watery environment. Okay? All right, so prokaryote reproduction. Some species of bacteria can divide through a type of mitosis called binary fission, and they can divide and thus reproduce in as short as 20 minutes. So it depends on the species. So they reproduce by binary fission, which again is a type of mitosis. The one parental cell just divides into two, and they can divide very rapidly. And again, in as short as 20 minutes, depending on the species, as long as there's plenty of food around and the conditions are favorable. Some prokaryotes can survive for a very long time under harsh conditions by forming these really tough cells that are called endospores. So they form a really tough, thick protective coat, and they can survive extreme pressures and temperatures, and some can even survive boiling for a certain period of time. And then when the conditions improve, then the endospore will basically open, and then the bacterial cell can then undergo normal cell division and increase its numbers. So nutrition, how prokaryotes attain nutrition, it's very variable. Like multicellular organisms, prokaryotes must obtain energy and carbon for synthesizing, making their organic compounds. You know, their proteins and carbohydrates and nucleic acids, right? So they obtain energy by means of using oxygen in the environment, in the air or in the water, and the sun's energy through photosynthesis. So some prokaryotes can photosynthesize, just like plants, for example. If you ever see a little pond or a stream of water and this green mucky stuff inside, some of that stuff are photosynthetic prokaryotes, like bacteria. Some obtain energy from eating other material, just like we do. For example, some are heterotrophic. Remember, photosynthesis means organisms are autotrophic. Some are heterotrophic. These are the bacteria that decompose, for example, dead things. And some can decompose or break down living things. So the metabolic capabilities of prokaryotes are very diverse, and actually more diverse than eukaryotic organisms. Some species can harvest energy from inorganic substances such as ammonia and hydrogen sulfide, which eukaryotes really can't do. Right? So when hydrogen sulfide is utilized for energy by prokaryotes, it releases a gas that smells like rotten eggs. So if you've ever been near a pond or a swamp, for example, and it has that smell, that's due in part to some of the prokaryotes that are utilizing hydrogen sulfide for energy, right? Breaking these molecules down and releasing the energy from the chemical bonds. Right? Then that energy is used to make ATP, and then they use the ATP to fuel their cellular needs. Some prokaryotes are symbiotic partners with animals, plants, and or fungi. This is actually fairly common in nature. For example, we have symbiotic prokaryotes in our gut to help maximize our nutrition uptake from our food. So a symbiosis is a close association between two or more species. So we have what are called symbiotic or beneficial symbiotic bacteria in our guts. And symbiosis is very common in nature. So many animals that inhabit hydrothermal vent communities, remember we talked about that when I talked about the origin of organic molecules in life, and many of these animals inhabit these environments have symbiotic prokaryotes within their bodies. So for example, these tube worms, it's a type of worm, and they filter organic material out of the water, but they also harbor or also have bacteria in their bodies that can break down hydrogen sulfide and use sulfide as a chemical to harness energy, the bacteria do, and then some of the waste material is nutrients for these tube worms. So it's an association where the tube worms provide a home for the bacteria, and the bacteria provide some extra nutrients for the tube worms. So it's a symbiotic relationship where both organisms benefit. Okay? So the animals absorb sulfur compounds from the seawater. Bacteria use the sulfur compounds as a source of energy, right? Converting carbon dioxide in the water into organic molecules. And then again, that provides nutrients for the host worm in this case. So in addition to photosynthesis, some cyanobacteria, which is a type of bacteria that typically can photosynthesize and are typically green or golden in color. Excuse me, here's a chain of them linked together. They can also do what's called nitrogen fixation. And that's the process where they can absorb nitrogen gas from the air, this N2, and convert it into a form that plants can actually use. So it's called nitrogen fixation. Plants that do photosynthesis, they do carbon fixation, right? They absorb CO2, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and convert the carbon and the CO2 into organic molecules, like sugars, carbohydrates. That's called carbon fixation. But some of these prokaryotes can do nitrogen fixation. So for example, there's a symbiosis, association between a cyanobacteria that helps plants, such as what's called this water fern, azolla. And the azolla then absorbs the nitrogen-containing molecules produced by prokaryotes, cyanobacteria that can do nitrogen fixation. The water fern utilizes that now organic form of nitrogen molecule, and that helps the azolla plant grow. But then that means there's also nitrogen-containing molecules in the water that rice plants can utilize to boost the rice growth and rice production. So this little floating water plant has been used in association with growing rice for thousands of years, because early farmers, rice farmers, realized that in water where this plant was growing, the azolla was growing, that boosted rice production. So when they're growing rice, they also make sure that this plant is growing around the rice, and that helps. And the reason it helps is because there's cyanobacteria that does nitrogen fixation, providing nutrients for the azolla, and then that also winds up providing nutrients for the rice plant. So like that's a symbiosis there of three organisms: the cyanobacteria, this water fern, and the rice plant. And if you want to throw in humans, that's a fourth organism that benefits, because the humans are going to eat the rice. Okay? Okay, so the ecological impacts of prokaryotes is vast. I talked about how they do nutrient cycling of, say, nitrogen or carbon through photosynthesis, and breaking down of dead materials to release nutrients back into the soil and or the atmosphere for other organisms to utilize. So prokaryotes are very important ecologically. So they perform a variety of these ecological services. So life on Earth depends on the recycling of chemical elements between the biological living components of the world and the physical non-living components, like, say, the soil, in terms of the chemicals that are in the soil that living organisms will utilize and absorb. So the prokaryotes play these essential roles in many of these chemical cycling processes. Okay? And again, they're also decomposers. They promote their breakdown of organic wastes and dead organisms, helping them rot and decompose, releasing, some gases into the atmosphere, but also, again, releasing organic materials from those dead things back into the environment, into the soil, that living plants and fungus can utilize to grow. So very important ecologically, the protes.